Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for participating in the Alliance's Humanitarian Clean Cooking Fund Introduction and Frequently Asked Questions webinar. Please take the few minutes to note the webinar logistics. In a few minutes, we'll begin the presentation. Great, thank you for your attention. I'll now present a brief overview of the Alliance and our model. The Global Alliance for Clean Cookstoves is a public-private partnership that was launched in 2010. The Alliance and its over 1,700 partners work to address the persistent problem of household air pollution, which contributes to over 4 million premature deaths annually and impacts 3 billion people globally. The Alliance works to build a thriving market of clean cookstoves and fuels and advance our adoption goal of enabling 100 million households by 2020 to adopt clean cookstoves and fuels. The Alliance is driven by several principles and 3 core strategies to drive the adoption of clean cooking solutions and scale the impact of the sector. We work to address supply side, demand generation, and market enabling interventions in order to foster a thriving and healthier market of stoves and fuels. The Alliance supports building the capacity and knowledge of our partners to grow and thrive in the sector. If you have not registered as an Alliance partner, we encourage you to learn more about partner benefits by visiting www.cleancookstoves.org/partners/. Finally, we would like to remind our partners that registration is now open for the 2017 Clean Cooking Forum. We are pleased to announce that this year's forum will have 3 humanitarian-focused sessions. Register today to get the early bird registration fee, and please visit www.cleancooking2017.org for more information. Thank you. I will now hand over the presentation to my colleague, Krista.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Krista Ridley. I'm the Senior Director for Gender and Humanitarian Programs here at the Global Alliance for Clean Cookstoves. Since 2010, the Alliance has been committed to reaching the world's most vulnerable people through our humanitarian program. The program complements and leverages our market-based work, diverse partner base, and geographic reach to increase access to cooking solutions in humanitarian settings, such as refugee camps and areas affected by natural disaster. The Alliance serves as a co-chair for the Safe Access to Fuel and Energy Humanitarian Working Group, which facilitates a more coordinated, predictable, timely, and effective response to the fuel and energy needs of crisis-affected populations. Through the SAFE Working Group, the Alliance spearheads efforts to make energy access for heating, lighting, cooking, and powering a fundamental part of humanitarian aid. The Alliance supports humanitarian organizations to implement clean cooking solutions in humanitarian settings through coordination, technical assistance, capacity building, research, advocacy, and fundraising for the sector. The Humanitarian Clean Cooking Fund is the result of several years' work on the part of the Alliance to garner support for cooking solutions in humanitarian settings, and is made possible by the generous support of the Government of Norway, more specifically the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, or NORAD. I'll now hand it over to Kathleen Callahy, our Program Associate for Humanitarian Programs, who will provide more detail on the Humanitarian Clean Cooking Fund and specifically the call for concepts.
Thanks, Krista. Thank you, everyone, for joining the call today. We're really excited to talk about this new fund with you. I just briefly wanted to go over the objective of the webinar today and remind everyone that all critical information in this webinar is included in the call for concepts, which is available on the link shown on the screen. We strongly recommend that everyone who is applying for the fund read the call for concepts very carefully. It goes through all the eligibility requirements in detail that you need to know to make your proposal successful. So today, during the webinar, we're going to briefly touch on the background and need for this fund. Then we'll go through the grant details, the application process, the eligibility criteria. Then we'll give you some answers to some preliminary frequently asked questions we've gotten before now. And then we'll go into a Q&A session live on the webinar. So briefly, just to touch on the background and need for this fund. Over 125 million people are in need of humanitarian aid today. This is according to the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Generally speaking, the food provided by humanitarian agencies must be cooked before it can be eaten, but cookstoves and fuel are not yet a standard part of humanitarian aid. In general, energy access itself is not typically included in humanitarian aid budgets or strategies. Among other consequences, a major consequence of this is that vast funding shortages for cooking and other energy solutions in humanitarian settings exists. In response to this shortage, we have initiated the Humanitarian Clean Cooking Fund. The objective of the fund is to increase access to cleaner fuels, more efficient cooking technologies, and innovative distribution methods among crisis-affected people, such as refugees, internally displaced persons, and those impacted by natural disasters. As Krista mentioned, the fund is supported by the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, or NORAD. The fund offers 2 grants, each with a range of $150,000 to $250,000 in USD. The grant supports the scale-up of cooking solutions in humanitarian settings. These terms scale up and humanitarian are really important to remember, and we'll get into them in just a second. The grant term is 14 months. We expect projects to initiate in October 2017 and go through December 2018. So let's touch on this point about scale up. What do we mean by scale up? HCCF projects must have been previously implemented or pilot tested and produced measurable benefits in at least one humanitarian setting. What this means is that HCCF is not meant as a project to pilot test cooking technologies or alternative fuels that have not already proven successful in humanitarian settings. We want to make sure that these solutions have already proven to be effective in humanitarian settings which have specific challenges that are difficult to address. Why are we focusing on this? Part of the issue is need. Funding sources exist for pilot projects, innovation, and new technologies. Far fewer focus on scaling, so this is our effort to provide an additional resource on that. Another is opportunity. Many cooking solutions already exist in humanitarian settings and have been piloted already, but just don't have the ability to grow and expand or scale up. A third reason is crowding. We've gotten feedback from our humanitarian partners that, especially in refugee camps, there are simply too many pilot projects going on. They're implemented without coordination, they're short-term, and there's generally no follow-up. So of the 2 types of projects, scale-up and pilot, scale-up projects are the ones that are generally needed more. And lastly is this issue of sustainability. At the World Humanitarian Summit last year, there was wide acknowledgement that the aid community in general needs to shift from thinking about short-term emergency aid to long-term solutions. With this in mind, we're giving preference to projects that are likely to provide benefits to humanitarian populations well beyond the life of the project, and projects that are not wholly dependent on donor funds. Now let's touch on humanitarian. HCCF projects must primarily benefit a humanitarian population, and the way that we're defining that is refugees, internally displaced people, or those affected by natural disaster. When we say humanitarian settings, what we mean is a setting in which the majority of the project's beneficiaries fit this definition. We do, however, encourage that co-benefits for neighboring communities, such as host communities, are part of the project. By natural disaster, we generally mean things like earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis, etc., things that directly impact people's ability to cook. Let's talk about the application process. Currently, we're in the call for concept stage, which will conclude on July 21st. That's a Friday. Applicants need to submit project concepts no later than 11:59 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on July 21st. and you need to submit your project to the email at the bottom of the screen, humanitarian@cleancookstoves.org. Applications do need to be written in English. You may submit as a single orientation or organization or as part of a consortium. You may also submit more than one concept, although we prefer that you don't submit more than 2. You are required to use the Alliance's application form, which is available with the call for concepts and all other application documents at the link shown on the screen. After the concept stage, we'll take some time to review all the concepts we've received and select a few to move on to the proposal stage. So essentially, we will invite these organizations to submit full proposals, and we'll provide more guidance at that point on the selection criteria. Those select organizations will then have from October 31st to from August 14th to 30th to develop proposals and then submit them. From August 31st to September 14th, the Alliance will review all the full proposals and select 2 winners for the 2 grants on September 15th. Excuse me. Now let's talk about eligibility. This is the most important thing to remember. All eligibility requirements have to be met in order for your concept to be considered for the HCCF. We've already touched on these 2, humanitarian and proof of concept, which is how we're referring to scale up. The majority of your beneficiaries must be refugees, IDPs, or those affected by a natural disaster. Projects have to have been previously implemented and produced measurable benefits in at least 1 humanitarian setting. We're not accepting projects that have not previously been piloted in humanitarian settings. You will be asked to describe the pilot project and its impacts in your application, and the instructions are included in the application form. So let's go through some of the other eligibility requirements. In terms of your organization, we require that all organizations applying register to become an Alliance partner. If you're not already an Alliance partner, it's very easy to sign up and it's free. You just go to the link on the screen at the Alliance website and complete your partner registration form. This needs to be done prior to submitting your concept. Next is your organization type and legal structure. HCCF applicants may be, but are not limited to, for-profit companies, social enterprises, foundations, and nonprofits. You must be legally registered or have permission to operate in the country where the project will be implemented. And if applicable, as in some countries such as India, you must have permission to receive funds from a foreign donor. And lastly, you must have audited financial statements as proof of financial operating status. Now, we do want to note that we are not requiring applicants to submit copies of your legal and financial documentation during the concept stage, but you should be prepared to submit them should you be asked to submit a full proposal. Organization maturity. Your lead applicant organization must have been in operation for at least 3 years. This is essentially one of the ways that we are ensuring that you have the requisite background and experience to implement this project. In terms of eligibility requirements of your project, we've had a lot of questions about location. Your project can take place in any location, any country, state, or region, as long as the location or the beneficiaries lack access to a large shared electrical grid. In other words, the situation needs to be primarily off-grid. It has to be focused on cooking. And by that we mean focused on cooking technologies, fuels, and or distribution methods for a humanitarian population. Bundling with other energy technologies, for example, implementing a stove project along with solar lamps, charging stations, or other energy products is allowed. However, HCCF funds may not be primarily used to purchase them. And lastly, impact areas. The Alliance, your project has to implement at least 2 or impact at least 2 of the Alliance's key mission areas. So this is health, livelihoods, women's empowerment, and the environment. Your technology or fuel, I'm sorry, so backing up. In regards to the technology or fuel, if you're proposing one of these for your application, we have one eligibility requirement about product performance. We want you to share information about the performance and adoption rate of your proposed fuel and or stove. Essentially, we need to know how effective this alternative fuel or cooking technology is going to be. Preference will be given to applications that can include field and/or laboratory test results for efficiency, safety, durability, and emissions, especially those following protocols that have been mapped to the IWA tier ratings. You are not required to include both a stove and a fuel in your application, but if you do only include one, you must explain how the beneficiaries will access the other. What we mean by this is, for example, if you're implementing an LPG project with just the stove, you need to explain how the refugees or internally displaced people are going to access LPG fuel. If you need more information about specific testing methodologies and protocols or the IWA tier ratings, these are available on the Alliance's website, which you can find at the link on the screen. So those are the full set of eligibility requirements. We wanted to briefly address a couple of questions that we received prior to the webinar, and these are primarily concerned with the project budget. As we mentioned before, the budget for each project is a minimum of $150,000 USD and a maximum of $250,000 USD. You are not required to submit a detailed budget during the concept phase. We're just asking you to provide an amount. There's no automatic penalty or benefit to the amount of funds that you apply for. It's more important to demonstrate that your project is feasible and reasonable within the proposed budget. So that's what we'll be looking for. There are no specific stipulations at this time as to what type of costs the HCCF funds, grant funds will cover, including operational, overhead management, administrative, and so forth. Basically, if your project reaches the proposal stage, we'll provide further guidance on this. So now I'd like to move us into the question and answer session. If you would like to submit a question, just enter one in the box in the GoToWebinar window. We'll read through them as they come in, so give us your patience and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, one thing I didn't mention previously, we've received a lot of questions about, am I eligible for HCCF or should I apply? We do want to make it clear that in order to be fair to everyone, we can't provide individual assessments about whether or not you should apply for the HCCF or whether you're eligible. It's up to each organization to decide that based on the eligibility requirements. So we just simply encourage you to review the call for concepts, the application form, and after this, the frequently asked questions that we will post on the website. As Kavanaugh mentioned before, the webinar is recorded, and we will also post the presentation slides on the same web page where the call for concepts is located. So if you missed anything, don't worry, it'll all be available. Will you be doing this funding opportunity again next year? We hope so, but this is going to depend on the availability of funding. Okay, so in case you missed it earlier, if you are looking to apply, all you need to do is go to the link earlier given on our website to download the call for concepts and the application form and submit your completed application form to humanitarian@cleancookstoves.org no later than 11:59 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Friday, July 21st. Yes, and as we mentioned before, your application has to be submitted in English. Can you receive an extension if you're unable to meet the July 21st date? Unfortunately, no. The timeline for this grant is really tight and we just can't grant extensions. Any applications received after 11:59 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Friday, July 21st will not be accepted. Can you change consortium members or can you change partners assuming your concept is accepted? In other words, can you change them between the concept and proposal stage? I think yes, as long as the overall project concept remains the same and consortium members meet the eligibility requirements, you can add or change partners. However, we are going to ask that the consortium lead remain the same. How many attachments can you include with your application? You can include any number, but keep in mind that if your attachments are providing information that we've not asked for, we're not likely to review them. and make sure that you name your files the way that is stipulated in the application form.
Continuing with the question and answer, are interventions using improved biomass stoves eligible? Yes, as long as the stoves produce measurable benefits in a humanitarian population in a previous pilot project. Keep in mind that your proposed scale-up project must improve the lives of a humanitarian population in at least 2 of the Alliance's 4 mission areas, which are health, livelihoods, women's empowerment, and environmental protection. We have a question regarding the types of stoves. Are both portable and built-in stoves, built-in place stoves eligible? Yes. What do you mean by distribution approach? We had a couple of these questions. Distribution approach refers to the means by which the humanitarian population obtains or receives a cooking solution, such as a stove or fuel. These approaches range from free distribution to purchase or other means. The Alliance has identified challenges with both of these approaches in humanitarian populations, both free distribution and purchase. While free distribution is affordable for crisis-affected people, it is not a sustainable long-term approach, since it typically relies on donor funds. Additionally, crisis-affected people frequently sell or barter free products for other goods. On the other hand, most crisis-affected people can't afford to purchase efficient cook stoves or cleaner fuels at the full price. So various methods to reduce cost barriers have been piloted, including cash transfers, subsidies, loans, leases, and vouchers. Any of these methods or similar innovations would be considered a distribution approach. We have a question as to whether free distribution is preferred. No. While we do not prohibit projects that use a free distribution approach, projects using more innovative approaches are preferred. On the eligibility side, I think we've explained already how you can become an Alliance partner, and once again, you need to become an Alliance partner before submitting your concept. You can complete the online form at cleancookstoves.org/partners/register.html. If you encounter difficulties, please email info@cleancookstoves.org. We have a question regarding location. Are projects from my country eligible? Your proposed project may take place in any country as long as it conforms with all of the other eligibility requirements. And the location or beneficiaries are mostly off-grid, i.e. lacking access to a large shared electrical grid.
All right, we have some questions about partnership types. Are partnerships between organizations of different legal statuses allowed, for example, nonprofits with private companies? Yes, partnerships between private sector and humanitarian organizations are encouraged to the extent that they benefit the project. You can read more about this in the eligibility requirements and the call for concepts under organization type and legal structure. Someone asked, my organization is less than 3 years old, can I still apply? You can't apply by yourself if your organization is less than 3 years old. However, you can apply as part of a consortium with another organization that meets that requirement as long as that organization is listed as lead applicant. So in other words, the lead applicant has to meet this requirement. We've had a couple questions about our organization does not directly have the necessary background experience for this grant, but we have a partner who does. Is that okay? As long as the lead applicant organization has been in operation for 3 years or more and you meet all the other eligibility requirements, you're still eligible to apply in this case. The purpose of the organizational maturity and proof of concept requirements is to just make sure that applicant organizations or consortiums have a proven history of implementing clean cooking solutions in humanitarian settings. So the more you can demonstrate this, the stronger your application will be.
So there we have some questions about eligibility regarding humanitarian populations. And one of them is, must all those affected by natural disaster have left their homes to meet the humanitarian requirement? No. A population doesn't need to be displaced to be considered humanitarian. Natural disasters that have directly impacted people's ability to cook or their access to cooking solutions are eligible. For example, survivors of the 2015 Nepal earthquake who may not have been displaced from their homes, but whose cooking facilities may have been lost or the fuel supply lines destroyed, would count as a humanitarian population. We have a question regarding whether drought is considered a natural disaster. Yes. We have questions about scale-up. I think we treated those in the webinar, but to repeat, what do you mean by scale-up? The Humanitarian Clean Cooking Fund seeks to support cooking solutions that have already proven successful in humanitarian settings and are ready to be expanded or scaled up. So you must prove that your solution has been piloted and previously implemented in a humanitarian setting and produced measurable benefits in order to be eligible.
We have a couple questions here about whether or not research or an impact study of a scale-up that meets all the other eligibility requirements would be considered for this grant. No, your application has to be for a full project that implements a cooking solution in a humanitarian setting. We've had a lot of questions about pilot projects, so we'll try and go through them as quickly as we can. Your proposed project was previously implemented but not in a humanitarian setting. Does this meet the requirement? Unfortunately, no. Your proposed project has to have been pilot tested in at least one humanitarian setting to be eligible for the HCCF. As I mentioned before, the reason for this is that humanitarian settings pose unique risks and challenges that can really impact the success and scalability of a project. So it's important for us to know that your project has worked in the same or a similar context. Would an upgrade of a clean cook stove that has not been piloted before but has chances to succeed in a humanitarian setting be accepted? No, I mean, basically, as we just said, humanitarian settings pose these unique challenges, including impacts on how well a technology works. So we're only accepting products that have already been tested in a humanitarian setting. We have a question here about our pilot project was not particularly successful, but with a few alterations, we suspect it will be successful at a scaled level. Will that be acceptable, or does the pilot need to be exactly the same as the scaled up project? We'll assess this on a case-by-case basis, I think. Learning lessons from an unsuccessful project is considered very valuable, and it's not going to disadvantage your application. As we noted in the call for concepts, variations on a project's model due to lessons learned are acceptable, but overall the concept of the intervention has to be the same. Can we apply to scale a project that was piloted by another organization? I think we'll also assess this on a case-by-case basis. At minimum, the pilot project must have taken place in a humanitarian setting, and you will need to demonstrate that your organization or consortium has a successful track record of implementing similar projects in humanitarian settings. Does my pilot project need to be over, or can it still be operational and the lessons learned be drawn perhaps from a midterm evaluation? This is another thing we'll assess on a case-by-case basis. If your pilot is ongoing, then make sure that you note this in the pilot project section of the application form and include as much of the requested information as you have. Just bear with us while we go through a couple of other questions. Our organization has not done a pilot yet, but we're very interested in this topic area. Are there other NGOs or organizations coming to the Alliance looking for partners? Applicants are responsible for brokering their own partnerships. However, if you are interested in trying to match yourself with a partner, you can find cookstove organizations operating in your country at the Alliance's partner directory, which is available at cleancookstoves.org/partners/directory. All right, we have a couple of questions on product performance. Our cook stoves are made by local artisans and have not been laboratory tested. How can we describe their performance? So just to clarify, test results are not a required part of your application, just a preferred part. So, describe the performance of your product however you can, with whatever information you have available. That could include anecdotal evidence or qualitative evidence. As we indicated in the call for concepts, your product should include should have produced measurable benefits in health, livelihoods, women's empowerment, or the environment in a humanitarian setting. Where can I get more information about having my product tested against IWA standards? We provided one link about the IWA tier ratings in the call for concepts, which you can find more information there. The Alliance also has a page on available testing centers, which is at cleancookstoves.org, Technology and Fuels Testing and Centers. Just go to the technology section of the Alliance website and you'll be able to find it. And we'll include the link in the FAQ document. Okay, and lastly, we have a couple questions on the budget that we didn't touch on earlier. Are there any cost share requirements? No, you are not required to include cost share in your budget, but we do actually strongly encourage it. This is part of the sustainability theme that we've been talking about. We want to make sure that projects are sustainable past the term of the grant. So if you have other funding sources that help your short-term grant, then we suggest that you do include them. Yeah, and similarly, can I complement the project with funds from the European Union or other funding sources? Yes, this is encouraged. And just please note it in your application form in the project concept section if you're planning to include cost share. Okay, and I think that's everything we have time for today, but to reiterate, the frequently asked questions that we've covered during this session will be available on the Alliance website at the same page as the call for concepts and other documents. So we thank you for your attention today. We look forward to receiving your applications, and we'll see you next time.